Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode here on European Confessions. There is a message that I want to share with you guys, and this message, it reads like this. Hello, I am a woman who is aged 48 years old. So even in the family where I was born, I am the firstborn, and in the extended family as well, I am the firstborn. So growing up for many years, and my parents, they were never united with their relatives, especially as for my father, he was never united with the rest of his family. So what happened was that after a lot of people started dying in the family, like the old generation, they started going to different churches. Then after that, us as the young generation, because of social media, we then started associating with each other. We would meet up on Facebook after spending so many years without ever speaking with each other because our parents hated each other. I can say that my parents were the one that hated the rest of their own relatives. So after we had started uniting because of social media, whenever I would speak with any of my relative, I would feel so much jealous because I thought that life was not fair. Growing up, our family, when I would look at our relatives, we were the ones that were well up in life. We had everything that we needed. All of my relatives, our relatives, they were deep in poverty. But when I started meeting several of my relatives, I saw that indeed life was not fair because they were far ahead of me and my siblings. And as for me and my siblings, we were the only ones in the family that were not actually progressing at the same rate at which all of my relatives were progressing at. When we were still growing up, like my cousins, most of them, they were like really poor, and we were the only ones in the extended family that were well up in life. Then one of my cousin's sister, after she had spoken with me, I would download some of her pictures on WhatsApp, and I saw that she was living an actually great life, a life that I had never imagined, knowing how she was raised up in a very poor family. She was enjoying life, and I felt so jealous, but I never showed her that I was feeling jealousy because of her life that she was living. I kept on downloading her pictures on her WhatsApp status, the pictures that she used to send, the pictures whenever she was being spoiled by her husband. So it then happened that I had to plan this trip, and it was just a random trip where I was traveling back to the village. When I traveled back to the village, me and my mother, we were just having a regular conversation. Whilst we were having this regular conversation, that was when I took my phone and I showed my mother some of the pictures that belonged to my cousin's sister and how she had achieved so much in her life. When my mother saw these pictures, I saw that indeed she was also hurt, and it was really painful to her knowing that all of my father's relatives, they had grown up being poor. So how come life had treated them very well like this? And looking at me, I had not yet managed to achieve all the things that they had managed to achieve. My mother then said that once the kids have gone to bed, like my kids who were staying with my mom, once they had gone to bed, she wanted to have a discussion with me. She wanted to tell me something that was really important. At that time, whenever I would visit my mother, I would sleep in the cooking hut. It was a mud hut. That is where me and my mother, we were just sitting and talking about this issue. When I saw that my kids were all fast asleep, my mother then said that there was something that was really important that she wanted to discuss with me. My mother then went into her bedroom. She went outside as dark as it was. Then she went there. When she returned, I saw that my mother, she was holding this other wooden plate, and it is a traditional plate that is mostly used for traditional rituals here in our country. When I looked at this traditional ritual plate, I saw that there was a watery substance that was inside this plate. It was like your algae, and inside that algae, I saw that there were small creatures. These small creatures, they looked more like your tadpoles that were inside this algae, and they had very strange big eyes that kept on popping out of that liquid green stuff. I kept on looking at everything that was inside that plate, and then I asked my mom what these creatures were. Then my mom told me that these creatures that you are seeing, they used to be your father's kids. My mom told me that like I was my father's child, so with these creatures, they used to defend my father whenever his enemies would attack him. I then said, what do you mean? My mother then reminded me, and she said that, do you remember that once in our lifetime, we used to live a great life. We had everything that we needed in this homestead. We had food in abundance. And I said, yes, and things are no longer okay, mother. What is going on? Then my mother said that it is because these charms, they have expired, and these charms, they cannot work anymore. And back in those days, my mom said that the reason as to why these charms were able to work, it was because most of your father's relatives and my relatives, they used to go to these traditional churches that never believed in spirituality and miracles. So it was easy, my mother said, to send these evil forces to go and attack my father's relative as well as my mother's relative. My mother said that the problem started when people from her family as well as my family as well started going to churches that believed in prophetic word, and from there on, most of them, when they were now Pentecostals, then they started getting these spiritual attacks. Then they would pray after receiving those spiritual attacks. And when people would get spiritual attacks when they had given their life again to Christ in the Pentecostal churches, that was when they noticed that my father was the one who was the evil one in the family. So when people started chasing after these prophets and powerful pastors, that was when my father's relatives found out that my father was an evil man. He was a ritualist, and the rituals made him to hate all of his relatives. My mother told me how my father had ended up being a ritualist. My mother told me that after my father had traveled to the city to find work, after he had gotten himself a job, he was working as a human resource manager. So in that company that my father was working at as a human resource manager, my father had that opportunity to hire and fire. My father then noticed that if you ever employ anyone, that person will only be grateful for the first month. Then my mother told me that my father had tried to help his relatives, but he then found out that his relatives, they were as ungrateful as the people that he had met in the city. So my father was then helped by this other man. This man, he was a Jewish-speaking man. He was from Malawi. He assisted my father and told my father that he wanted to give him some charms that were going to protect him, to protect his family, and to make sure that the boss was going to fear my father and to respect my father. Anything that my father was going to say, the boss was going to immediately agree. Unfortunately, my father had to retire very early in his life. The reason as to why my father had to retire so early in his life, it was because my father, one of the rules that he had been given when he had the covenant with that man from Malawi was that he was never supposed to have an accident. If he was going to get injured and he was going to have that injury that he would have sustained at that time when he had that accident, and that injury was never going to heal for the rest of his life until he had died. One day, when my father was busy working on this other machine at work, that was when he had an accident, and the rule of the covenant was that he was never supposed to be involved in any kind of an accident that was really bad. My father, from that accident, he could no longer walk because his spinal cord had been damaged and he became a crippled. He then returned back to the village. My mother then said that, do you still remember, my daughter, that when you were growing up here in this homestead, even though your father was no longer working and he could no longer provide food for the family? And I said, yes, mom, I still remember. Then my mother said that the reason as to why we never lacked any food in this homestead, it was because your father's children, these tokoloshis of my father, the ones that my mother had showed me, the one that were swimming in that algae, those tokoloshis, they were always being sent by my parents what they would do is that my father will say that, I want you, my children, to go and visit such and such a person. If it was his elder brother, my father will say, I want you tonight to go and visit my elder brother. I want you to go there. I want you to go and see what exactly is he cooking. What is he going to eat today? If you find that he is eating any meat in his homestead, I want you to collect all the meat that they would have cooked and return back with that pot full of meat. Not even a single piece should be missing from that pot. And that is how we never ran dry when it came to food in our homestead. But troubles, my mother said, started when my father's relatives started attending different Pentecostal churches. Then when they started attending those Pentecostal churches, that was when they were told that my father was a ritualist. Well, there was this other uncle of mine who was my father's youngest brother. When he gave his life to Christ, then he was told in church that there was one amongst his relative who was a ritualist. So one night when he had gone to bath, so when he was going to the bathroom, he saw that the bathroom door was opened, but at his home, each and every time he had told his children that they had to keep the bathroom door locked at all the times. So on that night, he found out that the door was opened. He thought that maybe the kids had forgotten to close the door. So when he entered into the bathroom, he then found out that the bathroom door was opened. Initially, like he had thought that they were the kids that had forgotten to close the door. He complained a little bit when he was walking into the bathroom, but when he walked into the bathroom, to his surprise, he saw this scary creature that was actually sitting on the toilet seat. It was that tokoloshi that had been sent by my father, more like a monitoring spirit. This monitoring spirit, it was in form of an old man that was locked up in a small boy's body. Then my uncle, my father's younger brother, he then got mentally ill, and he kept on shouting that my father was a ritualist. He kept on saying that my brother is the one who did all of these things to me. My brother, he is a ritualist. So when my uncle was now mentally ill, what my father had told that tokoloshi was that it was supposed to possess his body. After this tokoloshi had possessed his body, he then started going around begging for food. And what was happening in these rituals when he was begging for food, when people would feel sorry for him now that he was now mentally ill and he was unable to provide for his family, anyone that would give him the food, this tokoloshi would collect the food from those people's the tokoloshi would collect the food from the people that would have donated the food to my uncle. It would have access to all of their food that they would buy, the food that they would have bought in their home. It will collect everything and return with it back to our homestead. This is how we survived when my uncle was mentally ill. So after that, my uncle's wife, she then went and she spoke with the pastor, and she asked the pastor to come and have an all-night prayer at her home. Whilst they were having this all-night prayer, my mother said that I still remember that night when they held that all-night prayer. Even though they were holding this all-night prayer at my uncle's home, which was in the city, but my mother said that they watched everything on TV. And I was amazed when she said that she watched everything on TV, yet they didn't have a TV, neither did they have electricity. My mother said that they appeared on the wall something that looked like a TV, and they saw everything in reality. My mother said that they saw the pastors and the church members as they were busy praying, and they were praying throughout the night, and they kept on watching them on the TV that was appearing on their wall of their bedroom, until those people that were praying finally defeated that tokoloshi. When they defeated that tokoloshi, my mother said that the tokoloshi came from the city. It was angry. Then it started beating my crippled father. It started beating my father up. Then that was when my father disappeared, because he had been kidnapped by this tokoloshi of his. My mother then said that, do you still remember that other time when I told you that your father had gone to work on this other farm? I said, yes, mom, I still remember. And my mother said it was all a lie. Your father had been kidnapped by his Tokoloshis. Then this time when it had my brother, when this story happened, it was during those days when young people were being sent to training camps, which were called border gezi training camps. That was when my father just went missing. My father, he was taken by his Tokoloshis, and they went with him up into the mountains, where they tortured him over and over again, where they kept him inside this other terrible cave that they were keeping him in. And after that, when these Tokoloshis were done torturing him, then they told him that he was supposed to climb down the mountain. But during the time when they were torturing, they used to ask my father, and they would say, look what you have done to us. You sent us into an area where those people were going to pray for us, and look what they have done to us. So they kept on hitting my father over and over again. So we just thought that my father was at work, but he was being held hostage by those Tokoloshis of his. Then my mother said that the day that my father returned, when my mother looked at my father, she said that my father looked really terrible. It was as if 1,000 demons, more than the demons that once possessed Legion's body, had now possessed my father's body. After that, my mother said that you could not look at my father twice because he was really scary. Then when my father returned back from the mountain, he had been told by his Tokoloshis that if he now wanted them to work for him, they could not go back to his relatives that were now prayerful. He had to carefully select those ones that were not praying a lot. So my father, what he was doing was that he would go and sit at this other area whereby anyone who was from our village would be dropped or picked up by the bus, or at that same rank where the taxis would come bringing people from the city. He would just go there and sit, and he would select people in the spirit. He would see that this person is suffering from demonic possession. My father would even send his own evil spirits so that they can help those demons that were possessing that person to torment that person even more. And my father would actually steal a lot of good luck from all of these people that he would randomly meet. Then my mother said that, well, now that I have told you my story, don't you want to hurt this cousin sister of yours, the one that you showed me when you told me that she is now having a great life? I don't know what happened to me at that time. Maybe I was under the possession of those demons, because all of a sudden I then felt the need to make sure that my cousin sister was going to suffer for the rest of her life. I think that there was a demonic evil force that suddenly entered into my body, because I then felt that my heart, it just stopped beating. I was scared. I thought that I was about to die. When I felt that I was about to die, my mother then held my hand, and she told me that I was never supposed to be afraid. I said, why? Because my heart is no longer breathing. I then said that, why must I not be afraid? Because my heart is no longer beating. Maybe this is a sign that I am about to have a heart attack. But he said, do not be afraid. You are not going to die. What is happening to you is what is also happening to me. My mother then took my hand. She then placed my hand on her chest, and she said, come, my daughter, come and feel my heartbeat. So when my mother made me to touch her chest area, feeling for her heart, I was shocked, because for about 5 minutes I only had her heart beating once. And my mother said that after she had been made to join these rituals by my father, this is what happens to her. Her heart can only beat once, only after 5 minutes. And my mother said that, well, it is normal, and I want you to be like this. My mother said that even if she were to see the devil himself, you will never be afraid of him, because her heart was strengthened. And once your heart has been strengthened, my mother said that it does not beat regularly. It can only beat, like in my mother's case, once after every 5 minutes. And when my mother's heart is about to beat, you can actually hear the thud or inside her chest, the way that she breathes deeply. You can actually feel her heart beating only once after every 5 minutes. My mom then told me that it was time, that she wanted to strengthen me. My mom then gave me an instruction. She told me that I was supposed to kneel before her. As for my mom, she was sitting on this other bench. She then also knelt down, so that me and her, we were kneeling down whilst we were facing each other. She was holding that wooden plate that is used for rituals. She said, "My daughter, do not dare to touch this wooden plate, because if you touch it, you are going to die instantly." Then my mother said that, "I want you to give you these powers." My mother then told me that she wanted me to drink from the wooden plate. She wanted me to have a sip of that terrible looking algae. I then took a sip, and to my surprise, this algae, it was as sweet as yogurt. It was nice. From there on, my heart started beating really slowly. Sometimes I can even forget that I actually have a heart that beats. And usually when my heart is about to beat, I can actually feel it. The example that I can give you is, if you can close your eyes and then you close your ears and you start talking with your ears closed, there is this other echo that you can hear and feel in your body. That is what happens to me after each and every 5 minutes when my heart is about to beat. I then did those rituals against my cousin sister, because I was already possessed by the devil, and my sister, she is suffering right now. My mother told me that the way that I was supposed to summon this demon was that I had to collect some ashes, and these ashes, they were quite hot. My mom said that you are not supposed to pour water on these ashes so that they can go cold, but naturally they have to go cold. So I collected those hot ashes, and we went outside and we waited for these ashes to go cold, whilst we were just sitting outside having a regular conversation. When I felt that the ashes had totally grown cold, my mother then told me that I had to place those ashes inside the palm of my hand, and I had to look into the direction of where my cousin sister is staying in that foreign country. Then my mother said, "Blow, my child, blow, summon this demon, and let it follow these ashes that you would have blown." I then blew those ashes, and I saw these ashes, they were rising from the palm of my hand, then they started flying. After this demonic power had actually left the palm of my hand, my mother then said, "Congratulations, my daughter, you have now summoned your first demon. Congratulations, my daughter." That is what my mom said. Yo, dear listeners, right there was a message that was sent to me by one of our dear sisters. Yo,